In this video, we will be discussing the quadratic formula. The quadratic formula can be used to find the solutions to any quadratic polynomial equation. And all you have to do is identify your A, B, and your C and plug it into the formula itself. And here is the formula. Many students already have this memorized. If you do not, you definitely want to because we will not be giving it to you on any of our assessments. So make sure that you have that memorized. But the question usually becomes, where did this come from? How did somebody come up with this? Let me show you how. Please note that I'm not going to expect you to remember all this, so just sit back and listen. Okay, so we start with our quadratic equation. So here is our quadratic equation in standard form. Okay, all they did was take this equation with the variables shown. So the coefficients are just listed as A, B, and C. They did not put any numbers in there. And they utilized the completing the square method and the square root method and went through step by step by step of doing all of that, completing the square and then utilizing the square root. So this section here is them utilizing the completing the square, and then from this step forward, so then they actually put it together right here. So right here is where it ends completing the square, and then if you follow the green arrow, they have used the square root property, and then they just simplify it down to get that final quadratic formula. So that's all the quadratic formula is. It's just the quadratic equation in standard form that has been manipulated using completing the square and using the square root property. So that's all it is. And this will work on anything. Whether you can factor it or not, the quadratic formula always works. So let's go through some examples. We're not going to do too many just because it's pretty much just plugging and chugging. And then we'll do an application problem. And then we'll kind of pick it up from there. All right, so let's start with this example. So we gave you the equation. So here's the quadratic formula, just in case you forgot it. So the first thing you need to do is identify, number one, make sure your equation is in standard form. Must be in standard form first. And then from there, you can identify your A is 2, your B is 2, and your C is -1. The number one mistake I usually see with students is that they mess up a sign. So just make sure that your sign goes with you when you do those. And then it's just a matter of us plugging it into this formula. So negative b, so the opposite of b is -2 plus or minus the square root of b squared, 2 squared is 4, minus 4 times a times c. So you might want to write that down rather than trying to do it in your head, because that's a lot of stuff. And then 2 times a is your denominator, and the a value is 2, so 2 times 2 is 4. So let me clean that up a little bit. So -2 plus or minus 4. Let's see, -4 times 2 times -1 is +8. So underneath that radical, we should have the square root of 12. Okay, notice you can simplify the square root of 12. So let's do that. So you get x equals -2 plus or minus. When I simplify the square root of 12, that gives me 2 root 3. And then all of that is over 4. Notice that every single one of these whole numbers in front is all divisible by 2. So I'm going to factor out that factor of 2. So if I factor out 2, that's going to leave me with -1 plus or minus root 3 over, and then if I factor out the 2 down here, I get 2, whoops, not 2 times 4, I get 2 times 2. So notice the 2's will divide out, and that gives you your final answer of -1 plus or minus the square root of 3 over 2. So there are your two answers. Notice they are not pretty. That means if you get answers like this, that's telling you that you definitely could not have factored that trinomial at the beginning. All right, so why don't you give one a try, right? So here's your example. Go ahead and press pause. All right, welcome back. Let's see how you did. All right, so first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to identify my A, which is 3, my B, which is 4, and my C, which is -2. And then I'm just going to plug them into that formula and see what, and then do a bunch of simplifying. All right, so the opposite of b is 4, so plus or minus the square root of b squared is 16 minus 4 times 3 times -2 all over 2 times a. All right, so let's look inside that square root there. -4 times 3 times -2 is +24. 2 times 3 is 6. All right, so that gives me -4 plus or minus the square root of 40 over 6. I can definitely simplify that square root of 40. So I get x is equal to -4 plus or minus 2 root 10 all over 6. And as you will note, all of those have a factor of 2, so I can factor that out. So that would leave me -2 plus or minus root 10. And then if I factor out a 2 here, that's 2 times 3. 2's divide out. And I'm left with my final answer, which is -2 plus or minus the square root of 10 all over 3. So how did you do? I hope you did well. It's just a matter of plugging it in and then using basic arithmetic and order of operations. All right, you can use applications to use your quadratic formula. A lot of times in application problems, the polynomials or quadratics that they give you are not going to be pretty. They're going to be ugly, and you will definitely need to utilize your quadratic formula. So like this one, perfect example. It says, here's this formula to find systolic blood pressure for any woman at age A. It says, use this formula to find the age, so we are solving for A, to the nearest year of a woman whose normal systolic blood pressure is 115 milliliters of mercury. So we need to replace the P with the 115. So I'm going to 115 equals 0.01 A squared plus 0.05 A plus 107, and we need to solve for A. So this is just a quadratic problem that we are going to solve for A. So the first thing I would do is I would subtract the 115 from both sides. So I would do that first, and that gives me -8 here. So now it's in standard form. So my A value is 0.01, my B value is 0.05, and my C value is -8. And I'm just going to go plug those into the quadratic formula. It might just be a little tedious because you're dealing with a bunch of decimals this time. But the good news is you all have calculators. Please utilize them. All right, so let's plug it in first. So the opposite of B, so -0.05 plus or minus the square root of, we need to do B squared minus 4 times A times C, and then all of this divided by 2 times 0.01. So I would definitely just take out my calculator and do a lot of the work that way. So like I would just take that entire radicand, everything under that radical sign, and I would simplify it all at once in my calculator, and that gives me 0.3225. So again, utilize your calculator, that's what it's for, and the denominator is going to be 0.02. All right, so up here, the square root of 0.3225 turns out to be, so let me rewrite everything, plus or minus 0.568. All right, and then I can just put all of those in the calculator. So I'm going to do the positive one first, so I'll do the positive and then divide it by 0.02, and then I'll do the subtraction, and then I'll divide that by 0.02. And when you do that, you should get 2 separate answers. And again, these are all going to be approximate, right? Because this one I had to simplify it, so I really should have an approximate sign right here because that's where I started approximating. So when you do the positive, you should get 25.9, and when you do the negative one, you should get -30.9. Now, obviously, the -30.9 is kind of a nonsense answer because I can't have a woman who's negative. Oh, and I'm not solving for X. I'm solving for A. That's okay. You guys knew that though, right? You all knew that I was solving for A, not for X. There's no X in this equation. So this -30, this is a nonsense answer. I can't be -30.9 years old. Okay, so this is my answer, and it said to round to the nearest year. So this woman is 26 years old. So notice, kind of came in handy. One of the things in the quadratic formula that you really should pay attention to is something called the discriminant. And the discriminant is just that part that's under the square root. So it's just this part of the quadratic formula. That discriminant right there can tell you how many answers you'll have and what type of answers they are. Are they going to be real? Are they going to be imaginary? What are they? So sometimes you might not need to find the answers themselves. You just might need to find out how many there are. So you can use that discriminant. So if the discriminant is positive, so if your under the if that radicand in your square root is positive, that means there are going to be two real solutions and they will not be the same. They will be unequal. If that discriminant is negative, there will be two unequal complex solutions, and please make sure you write them in A plus BI form when you do write them. But like I said, in these couple questions, we're not going to be asking you to find that. And then if the discriminant is 0, that means there is only one real solution. So please note that another name for solutions are x-intercepts. So this information will actually help us out a lot when we are doing graphing because it will tell us how many x-intercepts we have. So will we have two real? We cannot have imaginary. So if we have two imaginary solutions, that means we do not have any x-intercepts. And if your discriminant is 0, that means you will have one x-intercept. So kind of helpful, especially in the graphing stuff that we'll be doing later in this course. All right, so if you have this quadratic, it asks you to compute the discriminant and then determine the number and types of solutions. Notice it doesn't ask you for the solutions, so it's not asking you to solve anything. The only thing it's asking you to do is to compute the discriminant. So the discriminant is b squared minus 4ac. All right, so what is my b value? My b value is -7, so -7 squared minus 4 times the a value, which is 2, times the c value, which is -4. So that is going to give you positive 49 plus 32, which is 81. Notice 81 is positive. This is greater than 0. So that means we are going to have two unequal real solutions. Some books say that you should write it as rational solutions. It does. I'm perfectly happy if you tell me that it's real. I don't need to know if it's rational. So go from there. All right, so notice, very simple. So I found the discriminant, which was 81. I then used that information to tell me the type and number of solutions. So why don't you give one a try? Here's yours. 2x squared plus 3x plus 5 is equal to 0. So calculate the discriminant and then tell me the type and number of equations, of solutions. All right, so let's see how you did. So b squared minus 4ac. So that's my discriminant. So that would be 3 squared minus 4 times 2 times 5. So that would give me 9 minus 40, which is going to give me -36. So -36 is less than 0. So there's my discriminant, -36. That is less than 0. So I'm going to have two unequal complex solutions. So this graph will not have any x-intercepts. Right, so that discriminant comes in super handy, so I really hope that you will use it to help you in the graphing, which we will start talking about in our next lesson. So see you then.